Hello, Wonder. Tonight I'll take you to the quiet heart of Rome, just beneath its glowing surface, where keys still remember the locks they once turned, and silence has its own memory. Up above, the city might be humming with light and laughter, but down here, time forgets to hurry. A lone archivist steps carefully through marble corridors, his footsteps soft enough to be mistaken for thought. The air is cooler, the dust a little wiser, and every shadow feels like it's listening. There's no rush, no plot to chase only. Slow doors, sleeping scrolls, and the soft breath of pages untouched for centuries. And so, if you're still with me, dim your lights, place your headphones gently, and if you can, sit beside an open window. Let the night breeze meet you halfway. Because tonight we begin with the faint click of a brass key and follow it wherever the silence leads. And if these kinds of quiet journeys bring you comfort, you might consider subscribing. Or perhaps just leave a comment with where and when you're listening. Who knows? Maybe the next story will begin in your wind, asterisk. You might not expect that a single brass key, worn smooth by centuries of hesitant thumbs, could still remember the timbre of every lock it has ever entered, but tonight it glows in a drowsy lamplight and waits for the softest click beneath Rome. A lone archivist in felt-soled slippers counts heartbeats against marble echoes, tracing candle shadows that lean like patient sentries along corridor walls. He pauses at the threshold where a discreet plaque refuses to announce anything at all, then turns the key as though winding a lullaby box. Hinges sigh open, exhaling dust perfumed faintly with clove and parchment, and the archivist steps into air cooler than memory. Down here, footsteps bloom in slow succession, measured, unrushed, no chase in their cadence. Each heel fall merely nudges silence aside. Between chained tomes he glides, noting with sleepy pleasure how copper clasps tarnish. In identical patterns, as if competitive aging were forbidden on this floor. Above, tourists bustle through basilicas. Below, only the creak of a leather satchel strap marks time. In one niche, he lingers at a scroll that has not felt breath in 200 years. A velvet coverlet of dust keeps it modest. He brushes a corner, whispers later, and continues, carrying the key's warmth like a pocket ember for dark corridors still to come. The marble underfoot, quarried before Casanova ever flirted, retains midnight's cool even while Rome upstairs pretends to glitter with electric noon. Somewhere a lock clicks itself back into place, not in warning, just in habit, and our archivist hums a line of plain song to remind the stones that hymns can wander slowly. Queued up not far beyond, the forbidden index waits like an untroubled animal. In sleep, pages rising and falling with archival breath. Here hide Galileo's confiscated margins, still sprinkled with ink freckles as though the astronomer's quill sneezed stardust. Nearby slumber apocryphal gospels whose vellum turns pale at daylight rumors, and a slim black codex rumored to summon either serifs or sarcasm depending on reader optimism. The archivist sets his candle's stub upon a brass claw stand. Dragons are always polite in this quarter and loosens the faintest cough, embarrassed to disturb such hush. He lifts a folio the way one might lift the wing of a tired bird, then chuckles when he finds the margin note, remember figs, pen beside. A treatise on planetary retrograde. Even Forbidden's authors fretted over groceries. A micro hook flutters every blink or two. A ticket stub to a 1605 puppet show marks the page of a band tract. A pressed violet, brittle as sugared glass, guards a recipe for invisible ink. Each discovery is calmly absurd, like finding a sock tucked inside a scepter. The candle gutters. Wax teardrops mend themselves on the claw's talons. Our archivist accepts that here, knowledge is less a ladder than a hammock. You lie back, sway, gently, and if truth drifts overhead, it will do so at conversational pace. He closes the folio, leaf corners kissing with papery hush, and the index exhales, secret settling as dust motes that refuse to hurry earthward. Candle in hand once more, he descends a stair narrower than diplomacy into the scroll room, where walls of script ripple in forgotten languages. An iron brazier offers guarded glow. Somewhere an unseen quill tip taps like distant rain, though no pen has worked here in decades. The archivist recites a fragment of prophecy, half Latin, half hesitation, and every word seems to add velvet to the darkness. A scroll wrapped in silk, the color of a devout pause, rests upon a stone cradle. As he unrolls it, gold ink stirs, thrilled to stretch after centuries curled like a cat. Lines shimmer, then fade, as though modest about their own radiance. With each sentence read aloud, the air grows thicker, not ominous, merely well insulated as if secrets prefer warm blankets, too. He mispronounces an archaic diphthong. Somewhere dust laughs so softly it sounds like breathing. A moth lands on the brazier rim, its wings lettered with accidental consonants, and the archivist pauses to admire the typo. Micro hooks continue. A margin doodle becomes a map of constellations interrupted by a scone recipe. A wax seal bears the thumbprint of someone who forgot their own name but remembered perfect meter. The archivist's voice lowers to near silence, syllables drifting like snowflakes that intend to melt before they land. Golden mutters fade back into modest ink, satisfied with their brief exercise, and the scroll wraps itself with the languor of someone draping a shawl for a second nap. Wait. A velvet hours now settles on the archivist himself. He retreats to a couch upholstered in dusk, tucks candle into a niche where a flame can dream without supervision, and settles among pillows that remember Gregorian chant. Latin voices, distant, precise, yawning circle him like somnolent fireflies. He recalls a fire, a theft, a hidden truth, but each thought floats just beyond reach, bobbing gently like keys on holy water. Eyes flutter, marble corridors recede. Footfalls of imagined visitors fade into pocket silence. In the vault, a lone book senses hush deepen and, with page edges timid as kitten paws, turns itself perhaps for ventilation, perhaps for gossip. Candlelight flickers approval. Keys in pockets shift their weight, deciding that tomorrow will be soon enough to lock mysteries again. Above, Rome's street lamps blink like slow satellites, but down here clocks refuse to tick at more than one. Beat per lullaby. Dreams pool beneath the couch, rising in quiet tide until even stone columns seem to float. If you find yourself drifting as well, let the candle's last ember guide your breathing scarlet, then amber, then nothing at all, while pages, locks, and whispered margins rearrange themselves into a lull so complete that even secrets forget why they were hiding and simply close their tired eyes beside you. You might not expect the diameter of a single brass postal weight for a penny, weight exactly, stamped with a sleepy Queen Victoria profile, to have convinced clerks to adjust their lunch whistles, inspired poets to rhyme half-ounce with soft flounce, and coax a Yorkshire widow to patent the first felt-lined mailbag so letters could nap in transit. Yet here we drift, following the drowsy history of 19th century letter scales. If you're still awake by the time I reach the dispute over whether a smudge of sealing wax counts as ballast, feel free to subscribe or simply rest your eyes. The post will still arrive whether you witness each ounce of it. The candlelit sorting room at St. Martin Le Grand hums at far below conversation speed, brass pans rocking with the grace of a cradle. A clerk in wool sleeves flicks dust off. A mahogany balance, its arms trembling like a dreamer between sleep and deeper sleep. He places a folded sheet, damp with fresh ink, onto the left pan, then sets that 4-penny weight on the right. The needle sighs almost to center, hesitates, finally agrees the letter falls within the sacred half-ounce limit. Somewhere in the rafters, a pigeon shifts, feathers arranging themselves into franking guidelines. Micro hooks float past every half minute. A ledger records the whisper of each letter's mass in ounces and drams. A doodle margins the page with blushing hearts drawn around a particularly elegant ampersand. Across the hall, another clerk polishes a weight so diligently. The monarch's nose begins to resemble a turned-off flame, the profile softened by countless circular caresses. No one calls it polishing. They name it pondering, and timekeepers obligingly adjust the wall clock to fit the rhythm of such gentle circles. Miles north, in a Leeds foundry, molten brass pours into seashell molds cheaper than sand. The foreman insists because oysters leave politely shaped cavities after lunch. Each weight cools at its own patient pace. If a breeze slows cooling by a heartbeat, then so be it. Schedules bend like willow wands. Workers file burrs until edges feel more like afternoon biscuits than metal. They stamp the numeral 1/2 with a mallet whose wooden handle smells faintly of treacle from an accident involving lunch and enthusiasm. A traveling inspector measures diameters with a caliper older than most empires and pronounces them comfortably round, a phrase that will later appear in parliamentary minutes without anyone blushing. One idle weight slips from a table, rolls across floorboards, and finds rest inside a discarded boot. Months later, it will be discovered, admired for its initiative, and issued a tiny ledger number like any obedient sibling. By autumn, the weights ride railcars south, cushioned in straw that crackles like polite applause. At Swindon Station, a porter pauses to weigh his own sigh. He imagines it might register a quarter ounce and chuckles alone. Barrels of ink travel alongside because ink, too, has destinies measured in drams. A thicker batch can drag a letter across the tariff threshold, prompting curt notes from cost-conscious suitors. An enterprising chemist proposes a paler blue designed to dry lighter. Love letters arrive 9 ounces happier, she claims, though no scale confesses the change. Meanwhile, schedule sheets grow drowsy under gas lamps. Departures delay themselves by increments only a brass needle would bother to record. Each platform clang echoes gently, and the train exhales savory steam that smells like boiled peas and damp wool. The scent of forward motion, performed almost in place. Night folds over the London sorting office again. Clerks now move with underwater deliberation, brass pans dim to silhouettes. A candle gutter flutters soot onto a register, marking an accidental, nonsensical eclipse between fourth-class circulars and exceptionally fragile items such as musical snow globes. No one minds the smudge. The entry will lull auditors into meditative pause decades later. Our first clerk, sleeves now ghosted with blue dust, sets the last half-ounce weight into its velvet tray. The dial's needle rests exactly vertical, appearing to dream of leaning but never doing so. Somewhere a clock chimes not quite on the hour, because minutes have stretched to accommodate every leisurely breath these weights required. Doors latch with sighs, lanterns snuff themselves out, and the postal weights nap in rows, small brass moons, waiting for next day's tide of parchment. If your thoughts have settled like straw around them, let them stay. Tomorrow's letters will still ride their balanced arc whether you count their ounces or simply drift where numbers blur into hush. You might not expect that the gentle curve of a single oak, Durapole-shaped like a half-moon yawning after lunch, could persuade librarians to index fate by fingertip, nudge carpenters to patent a varnish that smelled faintly of dill pickles, and inspire one shy engraver to etch microscopic riddles onto brass screws destined never to be removed. Yet here we drift, following the languid chronicle of the card catalog handle. If you're still awake when we reach the committee that debated whether satin finish pulls encourage quieter sighs, feel free to subscribe, or simply let eyelids shelve themselves. Alphabetization continues in perfect silence whether anyone watches. In 1863, a Boston book clerk named Eunice Hart leans on a pine counter and wonders why every request for something about geology, but not too rocky, sends her on scavenger hunts through shaky stacks. She sketches a chest of shallow drawers, each just deep enough to cradle cards the size of a restful hand. Her pencil, blunted by thoughtful pauses, draws a pull no wider than a spoon, curved so even-hurried clerks must slow their grip. Slow. Fingers equal slow voices. The reading room will thank her. A cooper next door steams oak into arcs, a process as unrushed as week-old molasses. He sands each pull until grain feels like corduroy that forgot its ribs, then dips them in shellac, tinted with leftover coffee, an economy of both color and mood. When the drawers arrive at the library, patrons' fingertips hover as if greeting shy animals. Anyone tugging too hard meets polite resistance from leathers stopped stitched to sigh instead of snap-dot by the 1880s. Card catalog fashion crosses the Atlantic. In Manchester, a manufacturer tests brass pulls shaped like question marks so that every search begins with a symbol of curiosity. The brass arrives coated in mineral oil that smells like distant engines. Apprentices wipe it out with wool remnants, leaving ghostly curls of fabric that later generations will misinterpret as authentic Victorian dust. A micro hook meanders by. Ledger notes reveal that question mark pulls reduce drawer slams by 17%, possibly because users pause to puzzle over punctuation before retrieving Milton. One drawer hides a penciled confession. Stole biscuit from reading room tray. Regret moderate, dated 1892 and filed under B for biscuit. Remorse cross-reference to Ardot turn of the century Paris flirts with Art Nouveau loops. Bronze tendrils winding like drowsy ivy. Library caretakers complain the ornate curls trap wisps of feather boas shed by nocturnal researchers. Custodians counter that boas muffle sound better than felt pads. Meanwhile, a silent rivalry begins between oval poles, favored by philosophers, for their uninterrupted glide and rectangular pulls, championed by geometry professors who consider every right angle an educational opportunity. A sleepy compromise emerges, ovals framed in rectangles, the diplomatic pastry of handle design. Across the Atlantic again, the Carnegie flood of grant money seeds oak cabinets coast to coast. A Pittsburgh carpenter, paid by the linear foot of dovetail, secretly shortens each drawer by a quarter inch to finish early Fridays. The resulting gap swallows one index card per 1,000. Librarians nickname the void the temporary annex, and ceremoniously retrieve lost cards each equinox, singing the dewy numbers like lullabies ascending minor thirds. During one such ceremony, they discover a stowaway note. If found, please file under 020 Shelf Dreams. The card, of course, becomes 20.01S5 through 7, a classification for things that classify themselves. World War. Eyebrows shortages usher in steel pulls painted to resemble sunshine dulled by distant clouds. The enamel chips softly, flakes thin as apology. Children waiting for fathers at the front collect them like snowflakes of improbable weather. To prevent rust, custodians dab pulls with paraffin. Readers complain that call numbers acquire the fragrance of seaside candle shops. A single enterprising moth chews a crater through a paraffin glob, trapping itself forever in an accidental amber cameo. Decades later, a restoration expert will gaze at the lump, decide the entombed moth is footnote enough, and leave it intact. Mid-century modernism pairs handles to minimalist bars, straight as librarian posture. Anodized aluminium weighs almost nothing. Drawers open if someone in the next aisle exhales enthusiastically. Patrons accustomed to the gentle tug of oak find themselves overshooting drawers, skate out like enthusiastic stagehands, scattering cards that flutter downward in alphabetical snow. To slow the flight, engineers add felt washers behind each mounting screw, dyed a librarian-approved gray called Low Whisper. Minutes elongate while washers compress. Eventually, drawers resume their measured yawns and an advisory pamphlet. Thanks textile engineering's contribution to rhetorical hush. In the 1970s, color psychology sweeps information science. One pilot program paints Handel's pastel peach to evoke dawn of knowledge. Another opts for moss green to ground restless inquiries. Budget boards note the paints cost precisely one bake sale of brownies per branch. Brownies proliferate. Librarians gain crumb counting habits, and cabinets glow like muted Easter eggs. Users report no change in search accuracy, but surveys show a 6% rise in feeling gently optimistic upon entry, a metric filed under 152.42. G45, optimism, environmental stimuli dot the microcomputer era looms. Some predict card catalog sunset. In response, Illinois craftsman Harold Nix designs a pole with a built-in magnifier lens, arguing that if drawers can double as optical devices, they will never be obsolete. The prototype weighs as much as a paperback and slightly distorts reality. At the edges, making call numbers shimmer like afternoon heat. Patrons swoon or perhaps merely squint. Records are ambiguous. Funding evaporates, but one lens poll survives in a high school library, where students test its fish-eyed warp on lunch period secret notes dot at the millennium. A Scandinavian design firm introduces birch poles lined with velvet to caress. User intention, the velvet, however, traps static. Cards cling to fingertips like affectionate moths. Librarians learn to flick wrists gently to detach analog cling film, inspiring an impromptu dance nicknamed the decimal shake. Someone composes a tutorial haiku. Twist, release, align, knowledge flutters, lands in place, hush applauds the air. The poem is laminated, misshelved under 811, but nobody, including the poet, minds dot, and in today's quieter corners, surviving cabinets breathe beneath LED glow, their handles bearing patina that resembles soft, focused bronze moons. A graduate student, hunting obscure pamphlets on moth migration, rubs one pole with absent thumb until its chill steps aside, replaced by a warmth older than her thesis. Needlepoint felt still muffles the inner stop. Drawer halts as politely as ever, offering index cards whose edges remember a million micro journeys from finger to tray to shelf. She finds her pamphlet, copies one date, then lingers, reading stray subject headings the way some read fortune cookies, dust preventive measures, silence philosophy of sleep literary analogies. Each card a lull, each handle a crescent moon waiting to be tugged again when another drowsy seeker drifts through. If you feel the weight of these handles settling on your own eyelids, let them. Imagine a corridor of oak, brass, steel, aluminium, velvet pulls aligned like measured breaths. Hear the faint hush of drawers closing in distant libraries you've never visited. Somewhere a still washer sighs, a moth sleeps in paraffin amber, and a question mark pull tilts toward the unspoken. Nothing urgent, no plot twist, only cadence shelving itself, one cataloged whisper at a time, until classification yields to dream, and even decimals decide to loosen their tidy shoes and rest. You might not expect that the exact length of a single brass chain link 9mm, give or take the shrug of a bored apprentice, could determine how much gossip cooled beside public fountains, how many sparrows learned to sip from concave, 10, and why one municipal clerk in 1894 campaigned for quieter street music. Yet here we are, drifting into the slow-motion chronicle of the chain drinking cup. If by the time I reach the municipal debate on whether rust tastes more like autumn or afternoon, you find yourself still awake, feel free to subscribe or simply close your eyes. Chains will keep swinging on their own steady arcs whether or not anyone measures the melody of their clinks. On a mist-padded morning in Sheffield, 1871, a foundry foreman taps the side of a crucible and listens as molten tin answers with a contented hum thick as porridge. Molds line the workbench like pewter moons waiting for tide. Each will birth a cup, no larger than a gardener's fist, with a lip rounded so softly that even hurried schoolchildren cannot chip it. The pour begins unhurried, metal sagging into, shape at a pace considerate of yawns. Steam coils, smelling faintly of wet newspaper and penny loaf, and an apprentice records cooling times in a ledger whose pages already curl toward sleep. Micro hooks flutter nearby. One mold carries a thumbprint fossilized into its base, rumored to belong to a night watchman who nodded off mid-inspection, while another acquires a perfect cat hair, forever commemorating the stray that used the foundry as a warm winter dormitory. When the cups emerge silvery and shy, the foreman weighs each, scratching totals that drift across the ledger like half-remembered arithmetic dreams. He insists the cups cool overnight, not for structural reasons, but because tin, he claims, dreams itself sturdier if it knows the stars are watching. By the next week, the cups travel to a small workshop where brass chain links clatter like rain that has forgotten urgency. A woman named Mavis measures every strand with a ruler chipped at the 7-inch mark, so each chain ends up 7 and a conversational smidge, encouraging users to lean in just enough to hush wagon wheels behind them. Rivets the size of sleep, sand. Fasten chain to cup, then to a wrought iron bracket destined for fountain stone. The town council has opinions about everything from chain gloss, matte preferred for reducing glare in noonday sermons, to handle diameter, wide enough for gloved. Hands, but not so wide that pigeons confuse it for a perch. One counselor proposes spring clasps to deter souvenir hunters. Trials reveal clasps thrum like toy pianos, causing horses to spook politely. The idea is shelved under future curiosities. Meanwhile, Mavis slips a clandestine twist into every 14th link, a tiny spiral only she can spot, believing it grants the chain a heartbeat. No record disproves her dot summer drapes itself over the square as the first fountain sputters awake, water tumbling in loops calm enough to match the drawl of midday. Cups swing from their chains, sending slow ripples over sandstone edges. Children, cue, mindful of the lecture about not letting lips touch tin, though most do, discovering that tin tastes faintly of cold bread. A retired sea captain compares the chain's creak to halyards on a listless voyage. A nearby seamstress notes the reflection of her bonnet in the water and decides to sew quieter colors. Micro hooks continue. Someone scratches EJ loves. Possibilities beneath a handle. Another cup accrues tally marks tracking breakfasts shared by pigeons and patients. Local newspaper reports a minor scandal when a wandering poet drops rhymed confetti into the basin, each scrap predicting tomorrow's. Weather. The fountain obliges with drizzle scented like ink. Through all of it, the chains keep gentle time, arcs shortening only when dusk persuades breezes to fold their wings. Decades idle past, bringing chlorinated caution in disposable paper cones that arrive flat as unspoken compliments. Councils debate whether paper tastes of forest or mere intent. Some cups are unhooked and boxed, their chains still bearing Mavis's secret twists. Others linger, lacquered by a mineral stains the shade of contemplative tea. A final micro hook drifts by. One fountain cup, long ignored, becomes nesting cradle for a robin whose chirps reset the square's tempo until even trolley bells soften in reply. Maintenance crews eventually remove it, relocating cup and nest to the municipal greenhouse where robins perform apprentice duties by eating aphids off poinsettias. The chain, cut-free, curls in a drawer like an elderly question mark. Tonight, if you wander an old market town just after street lamps blink themselves drowsy, listen for a faint metallic hush. Perhaps a surviving cup still swings, measuring breeze, in half-remembered inches, inviting a midnight passerby to taste water patient as a lullaby. Lean close, the chain insists on it. Feel the cool lip, the weight of 9mm links tugging you toward an angle amenable to dreaming. Notice how every distant sound, a wagon's echo, a clock's hesitant chime, arranges itself around that modest arc. And if your thoughts begin to sway in similar rhythm, let them drift. Somewhere a thumbprint in tin still holds the warmth of a long extinguished forge. A cat hair sleeps in silver, and Matus's twisted links keep time not. For urgency, but for the gentle permission to pause, sip, and finally set the cup to rest. You might not expect that the pitch of a single factory steam whistle, nominally A, flat, but often settling somewhere between a resigned sigh and a low yawn could choreograph entire breakfasts. Persuade choir masters to tune hymns a half step, lower, and inspire one shy horologist to patent a pocket watch that deliberately ran 12 seconds slow. Yet here we drift, following the unhurried history of the textile town time signal. If you're still awake when we reach the committee that debated whether a whistle at 4:37 p.m. should smell faintly of boiled wool, feel free to subscribe, or simply let your eyelids soften. Whistles will keep coaxing shadows across cobblestones, whether anyone counts their echoes or not. Long before sunrise in 1882, a night shift stoker named Alfred Pratt climbs the iron stairs of Hargreaves Mill, lamp swinging a puddle of amber around his boots. Above him, the steam whistle waits like an obedient comet pinned to brick. Alfred opens a brass valve the size of a daydream, admits just enough pressure to make the whistle clear its throat. The first note then, tremulous, almost polite, drifts over terrace roofs where cats recalibrate their purrs to match it. In one attic bedroom, a seamstress turns her pillow, convinced she has heard the precise moment when tomorrow begins renting. Space inside today. Micro hook, a weather diary kept by a retired sea captain, notes that on cool mornings, the whistle seemed to bend down in pitch, as though it too had tucked its feet back under the quilt. By 8 o'clock, the main shift assembles, every footstep timed to the whistle's second call, richer now, full of kettle memories. The mill engineer argues the tone results from a fractional dent in the bell, introduced when a delivery cart once dozed against the wall. Children walking to the board school used the 9 o'clock maintenance toot as permission to swap marbles for Latin primers. Marbles returned to pockets, still vibrating with the echo. In the weaving room, the looms eventually drown out human voices, but even they cannot drown the quarter-hour chirpa, petite jet of steam. Alfred insists on because machines deserve reminders too. Loom shuttles pause a blank wait, threads tension themselves like polite listeners, and somewhere a foreman pretends not to smile at the absurd civility of cloth catching its breath. Throughout the morning, small variations creep in. Condensation along the pipe shortens the whistle by half a heartbeat. An apprentice, consulting a grease-smudged chart, records the change as if cataloging rare birds. Across town, the clockmaker, Mrs. Fenwick, opens her shop precisely when the 11 a.m. whistle glides through her open transom. She claims the pitch helps her choose the day's escapement oil, lighter for bright notes, thicker for solemn ones. She is also the horologist, with the intentionally slow pocket watch marketed to gentlemen who dislike arriving first. Each sale includes instructions to confirm the watch's lag by comparing it to the noon whistle, an arrangement that keeps her business both punctual and charmingly adrift. Noon arrives with the longest blast, a waterfall of brass and breath. Soup ladles freeze over stoves. Church bells defer their toll by a respectful 2 seconds. Even the river seems to glide more slowly beneath its bridge. On market days, stall holders swear produce tastes sweeter if priced during the lingering reverb. A local poet, paid 1 farthing per line, sits by the fountain counting the seconds until silence, then adds a line for each pea-pod stream of northbound steam. Nobody minds the arithmetic. Micro hook, Town legend insists a canary once sang harmony with the whistle, was instantly declared a civic treasure, and spent retirement in the mayor's study practicing softer key signatures. Afternoon heat thickens steam, fattening the 3 p.m. signal into something almost edible. A chemist bottling cough syrup downwind claims the note confers medicinal vigor. Her labels advertise whistle-fortified elixir, though laboratory tests reveal only ordinary treacle and optimism. Inside the mill, loom grease thins, making threads snap like tiny violins. The maintenance toot migrates 5 minutes earlier to soothe needles and tempers alike. There's mild dissent. One spinner argues that shifting the schedule will confuse pigeons roosting in the gantry. Minutes later, a pigeon perhaps coincidentally drops a feather directly into the foreman's ledger, punctuating the argument with airy punctuation. Consensus returns when the foreman decides feathers are favorable omens. Dusk drapes itself over chimney pots as Alfred prepares the 6 o'clock release. This one is softer, an exhale rather than a proclamation. Housewives taste supper broth, adjusting salt to match vibrato. Children hear the note as last call for outdoor play. Marbles roll homeward again, still warm from pockets. The stoker lingers after closing, polishing the whistle's brass collar with wool waste material that records, in mute sheen, every note sung since Monday. He claims the metal hums faintly even when cold, remembering itself. Weather. Science agrees, no one asks. The hum settles between heartbeat and hush. Some evenings the whistle grants a final sigh at 9 p.m. to honor overtime. Town windows glow like cautious embers. Alley cats thread steam into their own conversations. Mrs. Fenwick winds her deliberate pocket watch, listening to its lag grow fat and happy. She writes in her ledger, "Whistle pitched low tonight, rain dreams incoming." Indeed, clouds gather by midnight, drizzle tapping roof slates with the soft persistence of distant looms. Water condenses on the whistle bell, beating into tiny lenses that refract moonlight into sleepy specks across Alfred's cap when he next climbs the stairs. Years shuffle past like wool bales. Electric sirens arrive, sharp as freshly minted coins. They pierce but do not persuade. Workers pace themselves. By wristwatches now, but some still pause, ears tilted, expecting the soothing flare of a flat. The whistle remains, relegated to ceremonial duties. First day of spring, torch-lit civic parade, occasional test when the engineer's grandson visits and begs for the old dragon sound. Each blast unfurls nostalgia thick enough to wrinkle. Modern schedules? Buses depart a beat late, baker clocks skip meeting cycles and sympathetic drift. Micro huck. At one ceremony, the whistle shakes loose a century of soot, showering bystanders with black snow that smells like coal lullabies. Townsfolk cheer, claiming good fortune tastes like licorice in industry. Tonight, if you lie half awake, imagining distant machinery, picture the lone whistle still mounted against brick, stars glinting on its dented bell. Steam, having nowhere urgent to be, dozes behind a shut valve, ready for the next anniversary. Envision Alfred's ghostly footsteps ascending iron, Mrs. Fenwick's slow watch ticking comfortable rebellion, the canary practicing harmonies no ear can quite recall. Feel each breath follow the memory of that pitch-low, round, forgiving until thoughts weave themselves into gentle fabric, shuttle whispering pause, 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 and silence finally spooling over the loom of your mind. You might not expect that the precise angle, officially 61, but practically whatever mood the smith felt before breakfast, at which a thumbtack's pin meets its flat little disc, could govern the rise of municipal notice boards. Influence. The tempo of church hymn selection, and convince one particularly wistful chemist that varnish ought to smell like soft pears. Yet here we linger, drifting into the gentle chronicle of the humble drawing pin. If somewhere between the debate, unbeveled edges, and the tragic incident of the misfiled hymn sheet, you discover yourself still awake, feel free to subscribe, or merely let your lashes settle like cork dust on a workbench. Announcements will keep securing themselves to cork whether anyone reads them wide-eyed or not. In 1876. In a drafty shed behind a Nuremberg clock shop, Fritz Nagel experiments with the notion that notices deserve dignity. Until this point, town criers pinch proclamations beneath button heads of sewing pins hammered through paper, an arrangement that frayed edges and egos alike. Fritz fashions a round tinfoil cap, gently domed, affixing it to a short pin crown from music box springs leftovers that remember lullabies even in silence. The first prototypes emerge slightly crooked, their pins listing as though sleepy. He rejects none, convinced a slanted tack encouraged the eye to lean closer. Micro hook, an early customer uses one to fasten a bread pudding recipe. Inside a tavern, the tack's crooked stance becomes the recipe's secret flourish, duly credited in the margins. Demand ambles outward, silver caps gleaming like calm pond ripples across Europe's notice boards. In Prague, a stationery merchant insists on brass, not Tintin dolls too quickly. He argues, and a dull cap conveys an air of forgotten errands. Brass, though brighter, tarnishes into sunset hues. Residents complain the hue suggests postings have expired. To soothe civic nerves, merchants lightly lacquer future batches with shellac scented faintly of pear drops. The chemist's idea, claiming sweetness prolongs attention span by one heartbeat. Municipal workers later report that stray dogs lick notice boards in summer. The varnish recipe is quietly revised, sweetness reduced to a whisper. Meanwhile, a ledger in Vienna documents that brass cap tax reduced replacement time for weather-torn proclamations by 12%. A statistic carefully converted into Austrian patience units, roughly half a size saved per posting. Across the channel, London stationers determine that larger caps invite them comfort during fog-damp mornings. They adopt a 10mm disc, soon dubbed the pudding plate. A printer claims the broader head reflects gaslight so warmly that commuters linger to read train schedules twice, even when the trains are punctual. In damp winters, condensation gathers on the cap rim. Beadlets catch soot, forming tiny crowns of black lace. A cleaner at Euston Station mistakes these deposits for experimental ink and spends a courteous fortnight composing letters with them. The script proves so pale that replies arrive addressed to Ghost of an Idea. Micro hook drift, a lost cat poster pinned with pudding plates, remains in situ 3 years beyond the cat's triumphant return. Having become a sentimental landmark, no one dares remove it while the tax survives. Standardization committees sprout like dandelions. In 1903, the International Office Supply Congress convenes in Brussels to decide whether pins should angle at exactly 61 degrees or relax to 60. The session lasts 9 hours. Tea service runs out of lemon wedges and inadvertently proves that 60 degrees punctures cork with 3 grains less effort, statistically negligible, emotionally decisive. The 60-degree faction wins, though dissenters publish a pamphlet titled 1 Degree of Chaos. A single tack from the losing prototype batch, painted defiantly crimson, surfaces decades later in a museum drawer labeled Miss Curios. Its pin still angles at 61, uncompromising as a cat's tail. The First World War shifts metal priorities. Brass bows to bullet casings, tin to mess kit hinges. Tack makers pivot to paperboard caps with iron pins dipped in paraffin. To resist rust, the caps flex under thumbs, producing a soft click reminiscent of distant telegraph keys. Office clerks claim the sound aids concentration. Poets at the front request bundles for affixing verses to barracks beams. One verse begins, "Hold fast, little circle, hold fast," possibly addressed to either tack or heartbeat. When peace returns, Surplus iron pins flood surplus stores. School teachers purchase them by the kilo, arranging geography maps in layers. So thick the cork resembles geological strata in miniature. Students excavate discarded tacks at term's end, trading those with intact caps like calm gemstones. By 1936, an American firm introduces a translucent cellulose acetate head, nicknamed the crystal crown. Sunlight refracts through plastic into modest rainbows across board surfaces. Librarians worry the spectacle distracts readers, but secretly enjoy the shimmer. Plastic proves brittle and cold. One winter shipment to Duluth fractures mid-thumb, leading to the famous icicle memo incident, during which an entire week's announcements flutter forward like surprised moths. Engineers respond with a glycerin additive that imparts faint slipperiness. Now tacks slide between finger and cork with the hush of skaters on dawn ice. A skating club orders thousands, commissioning a choreographed routine where dancers trace circles the diameter of tack heads viewed from above. The rink resembles a jubilant NOTICEBOARD that the mid-century office mania for color arrives on crepe solace. Tack heads bloom in pastel suites, mint for finance, peach for personnel, dove gray for departments unsure of their mood. A manager in Cleveland assigns budgets by hue density, more green heads, larger allowance, prompting employees to nudge. Colors under cover of lunchboxes. Human Resources later files a report titled Chromatic Budget Drift, recommending neutral beige heads henceforth. Beige sticks until someone notes they resemble aspirin. Staff begin referring to the notice board as the headache wall. Marketing reintroduces color, but only at random, producing a polka-dotted vista nobody can decode, which reduces complaint forms by virtue of gentle bewilderment. The digital age tiptoes in, promising corkless walls, yet tactile comfort. Resists deletion. Conference planners still pack tins of tacks alongside USB cables. A startup in Helsinki launches the EcoPin, carved from birch offcuts with biodegradable starch shafts. They smell like fresh bread, swell in humid halls, and sometimes snap, sending agendas swirling like leaves. Reviewers praise the initiative's ethos, if not its torque. Meanwhile, vintage brass pieces gain collector value, coveted for their tarnished patterns. One swirl resembles a sleepy galaxy, another a waitress's fingerprint forever serving time. An auction catalog lists a lot of 70 such pins as constellation condition. Tonight, if you pass a dim corridor in an old city hall, pause by the cork. Perhaps one shy announcement still clings under a brass cap dulled to dusky honey. Touch the rim. Feel warmth stored from 100 quiet glances. Hear and imagine echo the sigh of Fritz Nagel's music box spring, the distant telegraph click of iron flecks, the rainbow hush of crystal crowns catching sunset through dusty panes. Let each pin mark not urgency, but invitation to linger, to read, to remember some small, easily forgotten birthday of ideas. And if your thoughts settle like paper under that steady little disc, let them stay a while, pinned gentle as dreaming leaves until sleep's thumb sets the world at the exact angle it needs to rest. You might not expect a single musty ledger entry dated the 2nd of May, 1741, and noting that the prescribed minimum curvature of quill pen nibs shall be 1 1/8 parts of a barleycorn, to guide centuries of record-keeping, encourage at least 3 royal committees to debate the softness of goose feathers, and inspire a small Bavarian village to stage an annual parade of inkblots. Yet here we drift, letting the history of the quill curve ordinance settle around us like the faint smell of old parchment. If you're still awake when we reach the part about the clerk who filed an entire tax season in lilac ink to protest uneven bevels, feel free to subscribe, or simply allow your thoughts to lean like pliant feathers. NIBS will keep etching. Their sleepy arcs whether anyone watches or not dot in the spring of 1633. A Flemish scribe named Martin van Dorp finds himself coping with quills that scratch parchment as though auditioning for a small, irritable violin. He notices that pens trimmed. With a gentler curve, glide more quietly, hum a soft friction song barely louder than patience. Martin records the ideal curvature as slightly kinder than suspicion, a phrase that later confuses every apprentice who tries to measure kindness with calipers. Word of his discovery flutters along merchant routes. The abbot of St. Judic reports a 12% reduction in parchment tears during morning devotions once clerics adopt Martin's curve. In return, the abbot sends a basket of candied fennel, annotated, sweetness and thanks for smoothness and letters. Microhook, a postulant test with indexing the basket's contents copies Martin's curve onto the inventory margin. The fennel crystals fall perfectly along the arc, briefly suggesting that sugar itself respects the ordnance dot by 1670. Guilds in Antwerp required new quills to pass the candle flame test. Hold the nib 1 finger's width above a taper. If the flame flickers, the curve is too flat. Apprentices spend evenings in shadowy halls, nibs glimmering like modest crescent moons over candles. Some claim to read fortunes in the tiny wavering flames, particularly whether tomorrow's ink shipments will arrive unspoiled. A traveling merchant markets prophetic candles, guaranteed to approve true curves, though examination reveals them to be ordinary tallow with optimistic labels. Still, the candles acquire a tranquil reputation. Correspondence penned under their glow appears, according to rumor, to resist smudging during long sea voyages. The Ordinance of 1741 formalizes things in barleycorns. 1 1/8 parts proves awkward to verify barleycorns. Vary by harvest, so inspectors carry brass templates shaped like miniature rainbows. A quill failing to nestle under the arch is condemned to scrap. Orphans of the call become hairpins, pastry vents, or, in one exuberant case, wean chime tongues that play a faint, papery music when stirred by draughts. Municipal clerks are granted a stipend called the feather allowance, ostensibly for procuring compliant quills but often spent on warm cider, leading to a secondary edict. Receipts must be signed with quills exhibiting perfect curvature. Thus, self-enforcement quietly perfumes the ledger books with mulled apple confidence. Across the channel, English stationers view the ordinance with equal parts envy and dismissal. They compose pamphlets touting the free-range nib, boasting any curvature a writer's conscience deems fit. The marketing works until the Admiralty discovers ship's logs rife with scratch, jumps tiny, upward jerks, and muttering where rigid nibs sagged. Anxious about navigational accuracy, the Navy orders 1,000 brass curve gauges from Bruges. Sailors, noting the tools resemble pocket sextants, nickname them meridians for ink, and sometimes use them to reflect stray sunlight into gulls' curious eyes. Meanwhile, French salons embrace an even softer variant dubbed the curb day. Minuet curved just enough to suggest a polite bow. Poets claim the nib yields more languid cis and dreamy elongated L's, perfect for nocturnal correspondence. One hostess keeps a silver dish of such quills beside her harpsichord, inviting guests to pluck a feather between minuets and compose. Sentences that feel like curtsies. The dish is never empty. A discreet footman replaces quills during each applause, believing quiet abundance fosters inspiration. Micro hook, a forgotten note found decades later behind the wainscot, simply reads, "This curve might make even goodbyes linger." The 19th century brings steel nibs, brisk and bright. Yet manufacturers, eager to harness nostalgia, punch the Martin curve into molds. They market steel quills of gentle descent, promising the rust-proofness of progress married to the hush of tradition. Schoolmasters adore them, less breakage, fewer splits, margins free of feathery debris. Children, however, mourn the loss of real plumes. One inventive pupil glues discarded pigeon feathers to the steel shafts for masquerade. The hybrid pens shed gray wisps across copybooks, making arithmetic resemble small snowstorms. Teachers debate discipline, decide instead to weigh the feathers. As part of a natural science lesson, and accidentally prolong the fad. By 1905, the ordinance never repealed, merely outpaced, survives as ceremonial ritual. New archivists in Brussels receive a brass curve gauge along with keys to climate-controlled vaults. During induction, they slice a single goose quill, test the curve, dip it once, and write their name in a ledger titled Custodians of Silence. The ink dries into a bloom of warm brown. Edges soften like dusk. The quill is then retired to a velvet pouch, destined never to write again. Visitors occasionally glimpse these pouches in display cases, mistaking them for relics of improbable saints. Saint Scriptor, patron of soft angles. Even in our digital present, echoes persist. Fountain pen enthusiasts tune gold nibs to approximate. The famous curve, swearing lines look less anxious. Typography conferences schedule late-night panels on virtual curvature vector, Bezier's flirting toward 1 1/8 barleycorns. And somewhere, a calligrapher programs a robotic arm to carve goose quills exactly as Martin might, though the machine insists on printing the word kindness in block capitals each time calibration drifts. Engineers allow it. Perhaps still remembers the hush of feathers. Tonight, if a notification light blinks you awake. Picture a lone brass curve gauge resting in a drawer, scented faintly of pear varnish from Part 6 memories. Imagine sliding a blank thought beneath the arch, trimming its edge until it fits the ordinance. Softer than suspicion, curved enough to glide. Hear the quill's faint sigh as it meets paper. Feel each looped letter rock like a cradle, and let the slow ink persuade paragraphs to drowse. By the time the nib lifts, the sentence unfinished, you may find your own breathing shaped ever so gently 1 1/8 parts of a barleycorn into the curve that carries you quietly over. The verge into sleep. You might not suspect that the quiet, circular hatch beneath your shoes, cool iron modeled by decades of drizzle, could spin a tale long enough to lull a city to sleep. Yet here we are, tilting gently into the history of manhole cover inspection. Stamps. If, somewhere between the debate over font serifs and the anecdote about the inspector who serenaded sewer rats with lullabies, you find yourself still awake, feel free to subscribe, or simply let your thoughts sink like a dropped penny. On rain-slick cobblestones, the lids will keep whispering their stamps to anyone who cares to listen, even after your eyelids drift shut. In 1843. In an otherwise unhurried foundry on the outskirts of Birmingham, foreman Amos Beckett tries carving his initials into a fresh cast iron cover pure mischief, no mandate. The letters warp slightly as the metal cools, forming a charming wobble observers later compare to hiccups. When municipal surveyors spot the mark, they assume it denotes some official test. Rather than confess, Beckett nods sagely. Thus begins the legend of the inspection stamp, a symbol subsequently required by cities that could not bear to appear less diligent than a prankster's fantasy. Early stamps are ad hoc. One inspector presses an empty thimble into clay molds, another uses a pastry wheel to emboss crenellations. Like pie crust, a particularly sentimental smith molds a tiny sparrow silhouette. Pedestrians report feeling unexpectedly light-hearted when they step across it, as though permitted a brief flutter of wings. Micro Hook, a traveling preacher, claims the sparrow stamp cures corns if trodden upon at dawn. Bootmakers discreetly roughen solace to mimic its pattern, hoping for miracles in leather. By 1860, London's Metropolitan Board of Works worries that whimsy encouraged laxity. They issue strict dimensions. Stamps must measure precisely 2 inches. Across be recessed 1/8 inch deep and depict only letters or numerals. The order spawns clandestine rebellion. Foundry workers carve minuscule flourishes inside the ovals of stamped zeros, a star here. A crescent there small enough that only night soil men notice. One collects these secret constellations, sketching them in chalk on tunnel walls. Decades later, an urban astronomer tries charting them as a sewer zodiac, assigning each starry zero a mythic rodent guardian. Meanwhile, Paris commissions covers during Baron Haussmann's grand renovations. Parisians demand elegance even where no one looks, so the stamp evolves into looping Art Nouveau script. Verify. Iron curls like vine tendrils. Inspectors complain the fancy lettering hides rust blisters. A committee proposes adding a scent light lavender to confirm freshness, but the idea wilts when engineers realize heated sewer air would distill something less than floral. Still, rumor of perfumed covers persists. Tourists lean down, sniff, declare faint notes of romance or refuse. Depending on optimism. Across the Atlantic, New York favors blunt clarity, a plain block stamp in YC I crushed, beneath hydraulic presses that shudder like distant subway trains. In winter, brine seeps into the recesses, freezing into tiny crystal letters. Children trip them free with pocket knives, trading initial-shaped ice shards before they melt. One shard purportedly lasts a full subway ride, preserved in a mitten. Lined with wool and ambition, its captor grows up to patent a Fraser rail car, citing the memory of those cold silver letters as inspiration. The 20th century brings standardization. Foundries adopt movable brass dies screwed into press plates. Dies go missing, apprentices pocket them as talismans. A lost numeral 7 resurfaces as a tie clip at a civil engineer luncheon, sparking a bidding war resolved by coin toss. The winner claims the clip increases breakfast efficiency. He flips eggs with it every Sunday. Believing precision seasoning begins with precise numeration. During the Second World War, iron shortages pushed cities to recast covers thinner, stamping them more deeply to maintain authority. The deeper grooves collect rain, breeding the seasonal symphony of puddle planks. A London diarist notes she can tell the hour by the tone of water splashing from a broken gutter onto stamp type 4B. Dusk sounds like a veil a sigh, midnight like a dozing kettle. She falls asleep each night counting echoes instead of sheep, certain the war will end when the pitch resolves to a major chord. Post-war optimism paints stamps white for visibility. Inventors tout luminous pigments, so inspectors may check lids by moonlight. Unfortunately, phosphorescent paint attracts moths. Constellations of fluttering wings obscure the lettering. In Tokyo, schoolchildren dub them ghost coins. They spin stories of spirits who surface after curfew to read city names aloud, practicing pronunciation before haunting English classrooms. Teachers, amused, assign essays on municipal typographic design. Marks soar inexplicably. The 1970s eco-movement introduces recycled steel lids flecked with melted bottle glass, glinting like quiet mosaics. Stamps now proclaim reuse, the capital U stylized as an arrow chasing itself. Skateboarders discover the glass chips grip wheels. Sudden loyalty arises. Skaters steer routes according to which neighborhoods install glitter lids. One mayor sponsors a midnight skate parade to celebrate a sewer upgrade, inadvertently founding an annual festival where riders pause to polish stamps with candle wax, murmuring thank yous for solid ground. Computers arrive, plotting stress maps. CED programs suggest ovals over circles, groove concentric tread patterns, LASER-etched QR codes linking to flow rate dashboards. Yet each digital draft still reserves a recess for 3 plain letters. Kata, engineers fight to expand it add. Batch numbers, moisture indices, but the rectangle refuses clutter like an old librarian guarding a narrow shelf. Quietly, one coder hides a smiley face in the matrix of pixels generating the stamp outline. Laser optics carve it invisible to the naked eye, visible only beneath ultraviolet flashlights. Decades later, spelunking influencers post violet lit selfies with the phantom grin, captioned, "Even the drains are happy we're here," garnering millions of sleepy likes. Somewhere tonight, an inspector in a high visibility coat kneels on a deserted street. She brushes dew from a cover, presses a rubber gauge into the groove, confirms depth unchanged since monthly checks began rituals steadier than calendars. She taps the metal. Tone rings true, neither hollow nor shrill. In her report, she write, "Stamp intact, resonance normal." Small words that keep torrents safely beneath wanderers' feet. Let that sound carry you now. The soft chime of iron confirming its own existence. Imagine every stamp across every city vibrating in sympathetic hush, a subterranean lullaby tuned to the heartbeat of slow rivers under pavement. Picture the letters glowing faintly through moss, spelling patience in alphabets of drizzle. Allow your own thoughts to settle like a final water bead in the curve of a letter and rest there secure under the quiet guarantee that someone, somewhere, will kneel again next month to be sure the lid still sings. You wouldn't think 3 circles the size of a garden pea could guide the fidgety march of office. Paperwork for more than a century, yet the slow, rhythmic click of a hole punch has been keeping sheets in line since before most staplers learned to blink. If, by the time we reach the debate over whether the leftmost hole should sit exactly 17 or a daring 18 millimeters from the edge, you find your eyes still half open, feel free to subscribe or simply let the next gentle crunch of paper be your ticket to dreamland. The holes will continue aligning themselves long after your thoughts drift sideways. It begins in 1886. In a small German stationery workshop smelling faintly of linseed and fresh ink, Friedrich Sonecken, a man who wears spectacles heavy enough to leave polite dents on his cheeks, patents a punching device he calls the Papierlecker for Semmelmappen. Its 2 metal things descend like polite woodpeckers, nibbling twin moons. From the margin, early adopters complain the device sings an odd whistle if operated too quickly. Sonic encounters by adding a tiny vent hole that releases a sigh instead of features some clerks find comforting, like the soft exhale of a librarian shelving last pages at dusk dot by 1893. Ring binder rings begin courting the punched pages, but transatlantic courtship is awkward. American manufacturers prefer 3 rings, fearing 2 are a slippery handshake. Enter Benjamin Ames of Holyoke, Massachusetts, who saws an extra tooth into Sonecken's design late one Saturday, testing hole triangulation on leftover church programs. The result feels sturdier, like a modest tripod under prose. Waco Hook, a traveling preacher, later regrets that his hymn books suddenly sport portholes and tells congregants the pages now receive holy ventilation, sparking a fad of waving booklets to air the word. Standardization limps along. Some British firms adopt 4-hole symmetry, they argue, so tea splashes can drain evenly. Colonial administrators in Delhi favor a single heroic hole punched dead center. Reports suggest the pages swivel like compass needles during monsoon. Audits, a dizzying sight. One Egyptian railway accountant files each new ticket by skewering it onto a brass spike, an accidental predecessor of the modern spike file. Though less about storage than impromptu kebab dot by 1920, Chad management becomes a silent obsession. Chad the confetti discs is everywhere, clogging typewriter keys, stowing away in vest pockets, mingling with pipe ash. A Chicago office orders bespoke tweezers just to flick Chad from carpet tufts. Meanwhile, a Parisian milliner sprinkles the tiny circles over straw hats, marketing them as penny moon dust. Brides report guests spinning whole receptions, plucking dots from curls like promises yet to be fulfilled. The early 1930s usher in tension. American National Standards Institute proposes hole series A, 3 holes, 8.5 millimeters in diameter, spaced exactly 108 millimeters center to center. Pushback ensues. Philadelphia clerks find the distance indecently large, as though giving words too much elbow room. A compromise of 108 plus or minus 0.4 millimeters prevails, variance no thicker than a pencil's sigh. Inspectors stride through factories with calipers, measuring sample punches. One legend says a foreman folds a dollar bill into an accordion and slips it between the jaws. If the bill re-emerges unperforated, the tool fails inspection. He swears paper money feels the bite of misaligned freedom first. World War II. Shifts metal to munitions and hole punches adopt lighter alloys. Handles sprout wooden grips salvaged from broomstalks. Clerks note a faint pine aroma, briefly mistaking order forms for holiday postcards. Soldiers in field offices improvise. Punchless binding, 3 bullet casings heated and pressed through paper, leaving sooty rings. Post-war archivists discover charred dossiers held in place with shoelace threaded through smoky wounds. A rough resilience history nonetheless files under acceptable. The 1950s bring reinforcements literal gummy washers to hut punched. Edges. Teachers distribute pastel rings during exams, believing pastel calm reduces arithmetic panic. One 4th grader strings the rings into a makeshift bracelet. Decades later, she patents paper jewelry featuring genuine archival perforations, selling serenity by the wristful. Another micro hook, the Reinforcement Olympics of 1959, held in a Kansas break room, where contestants see how many reinforcements they can stack inside one another before collapse winner achieves 47. A pastel ziggurat still pinned to the notice board, curling like sleepy smoke. Computing sneaks in under fluorescent lights. Early data sheets require precise alignment for optical scanners. Programmers debate square versus round holes. Round prevails, deemed friendlier to jam-prone feeders. Yet the famed 2000 U.S. election butterfly ballot reminds makers why. Chat matters. Clerks clutch transparent overlays to ensure full detachment. Someone coins the term hanging intention, a soft joke about voters and bedtime procrastinators alike. Punch manufacturers quietly sharpen cutters by half a degree. Newspaper editors quietly say dot in 1987, ISO 838 attempts global harmony. 2 holes, 80 millimeters apart, each 6 millimeters wide. America nods politely and keeps its trio. Offices and multinational companies install dual standard punches sporting sliding guides. Interns forget to slide them, causing documents to straddle loyalties like uncomfortable tourists. A Tokyo startup invents a punch with 6 adjustable teeth. Marketing proclaims one world, many holes. Translation quirks make management blush. Still, units sell out to collectors who call them Swiss cheese wands. Green movements of the 1990s push eco-punches, promising 30% less chad. Blades press crescent flaps instead of circles. Pages fold flaps inward, forming snug tabs. Ecologists cheer. Archivists howl flaps, snag ring prongs, and crinkle timesheets. A compromise emerges. Offices run dual waste streams, one for chadless flaps. One for traditional dots destined to be blended into children's craft glue, a quiet afterlife. As glitter's humbler cousin, modern punches flaunt laser cut tolerances. Ergonomic levers, translucent chambers that swirl captured chad-like. Tiny snow globes. Designers add magnetic bases so the tool kisses filing cabinets rather than wandering. One engineer installs a soft-close hydraulic damper. The jaws descend in near silence, perfect for cubicles craving hush. A reviewer claims the subdued motion sounds like memory turning pages of itself. Somewhere this evening, a municipal clerk begins quarterly archive consolidation. She aligns a stack of zoning petitions, each page whisper, thin yet stubborn, and lowers the lever. A calm crunch ripples through the pile, leaving 3 tidy constellations. She taps the stack lightly, like tucking sheets under an invisible quilt, then threads brass posts through the holes. As twilight leaks orange beyond frosted windows, she notes how the spacing never argues, never asks for more or less. Paper, at last, agrees with itself. Think now that spacing. 108 millimeters of tacit understanding repeated across continents. Imagine every punched sheet floating over a dark sea of unpunched possibility, leaning into the gentle embrace of exact. Arithmetic. Let the steady chew and click slow your breathing. Picture chat drifting downward like patient snow, settling on thoughts that no longer need arranging. The holes will stay where they are, holding stories in calm alignment, while you punch out for the night, sliding quietly into place beside them. You might not expect a pale rectangle of stiff cardstock to have traveled farther than most transatlantic steamers, but every library drawer ever opened tells a small, tidy tale of migration. If you are still awake by the time we get to the debate over whether each card's upper margin should welcome 2 guide holes or 3, you're welcome to subscribe, though honestly, the cards will keep murmuring in their drawers whether you do or not. The first of these modest travelers appears in 1791, when the French revolutionary government tries to inventory confiscated aristocratic volumes. They copy titles onto playing card blanks, hearts, clubs, diamonds politely scoured away, then stack them in shoeboxes commandeered from a nearby cobbler. No 2 cards are the same height. A flick through the deck feels like riffling a pack of restless birds. Librarian Jacques Pignat suggests trimming the tops to a standard line so titles peak evenly, but his superior worries every row pasteboard may feel too symbolic. They compromise by shaving only the left corners, a gesture patrons quickly. Dubbed Republican ears. One afternoon a draft scatters the unfiled lot across a marble floor. An observer notes the cards skitter like emancipated confetti, each one briefly free before being raked back into order. The shoeboxes warp in winter, damp, birthing the first quiet dream of a fitted wooden drawer. By 1848, Thomas P. Rogers of Boston markets a purpose-built cabinet, cedar frame, brass pulls shaped like lions' heads, and a guiding rod at the back so cards cannot lurk beyond reach. He proposes 3 by 5 inches as the ideal size large, enough for the most verbose Victorian subtitle, small enough to sit politely in a palm. Yet Liverpool booksellers prefer 3 by 5 and a quarter, insisting British numerals need elbow room. Vienna's Imperial Library tries 4 by 6, reasoning that German compound nouns march on like polite infantry and will not be shoehorned. Micro Hook, a Viennese clerk, irked by the sprawl of the word Denademstvenflafsterses, invents the hyphen placeholder 3 tidy dashes standing at attention to spare the card's lower edge. Hyphen sales rise. Ink manufacturers notice a mysterious uptick in short strokes. The 20th century begins with a great hole punch schism. Melville Dewey, already busy numbering human knowledge into neat decimals, decrees 2 guide holes across the top so a steel rod may pierce the stack, preventing curious patrons from smuggling single cards as bookmarks. Chicago catalogers argue 3 holes reduce card wobble. Tests ensue. Librarians time how fast drawers glide when half, 2/3, then fully stuffed. They log draw capacitance curves on graph paper that later sleeps undisturbed for decades. Eventually, the Library of Congress sides with Dewey 2. Holes 2 apart, reinforcing rings optional. European libraries shrug, adopt metric spacing, and promptly print converters that no one reads. Meanwhile, the humble subject heading gains parentheses, brackets, and soft red rubrics for cross-references that behave like sleepy finger posts. A clerk in Montreal coins the term see also lull describing the gentle pause patrons. Take when eyes drift from one card to its companion like nodding between pillows. Microcomputers arrive in the 1980s, glowing green behind plastic beaks. Early adopters predict the catalog drawer's extinction within 5 years. Yet the drawers linger, their wooden fronts warm against fluorescent gloom. Patrons trust them, the way sailors trust constellations, touchable, silent, immune to power surges. Some libraries embed barcode stickers on cards to shuttle them electronically before returning them to their nests, an oddly circular commute. Others recycle drawers into seed libraries. Basil packets replace balsa, lettuce follows lock. In Boise, a poet slips haiku onto discarded cards and files them under Dewey 811, then invites visitors to browse quietly mended pages of air. Maintenance crews still oil the runners each spring, a ritual that smells faintly of almonds and bygone spines. One survey finds drawers reduce noise complaints by 18%, possibly because the whisper of card against card resembles distant rain. Today, a few drawers survive as heritage pieces. Children tuck the brass pulls, revealing rows of ghost labels, italicized headings faded to the color of old straw. A curator in Kyoto installs tiny LED lights inside, illuminating the forest of edges like a lantern festival for moths. She notices dust settles more slowly now. Perhaps motes respect illuminated ancestry. Somewhere, an archivist ties cotton tape around the last active catalog, knotting it in a bow so the cards rest undisturbed overnight. She listens to the hush that follows, a hush stitched from centuries of shuffled inquiry. If your own thoughts have begun to shelve themselves alphabetically, maybe under P for pillow or S for sleep, feel free to close the drawer on this sentence. The cards will keep their gentle alignment, breathing cedar into the dark until morning wanders and unclasps the next question. You might not expect a plank of timber fixed to 2 patient iron legs to reveal the subtle hydraulics of human lingering, yet the public bench has been measuring how long people pause since the first park. Keeper decided grass alone was too greenly decisive. If you are still awake when we reach the 1906 debate over whether armrests discourage courting or merely encourage very polite contortions, feel free to subscribe, though the benches will keep collecting folded afternoons regardless. Earliest deed of slowness arrives, somewhat sheepishly, in the cloisters of a medieval hospital garden where novice apothecaries sow sage against the south wall. Visitors complain of sore feet, so the prior orders a long chest lid repurposed. Into seating, it leans just enough to squeak when someone shifts, creating the first unintended conversation buffer. Nobody wishes to creak twice in one sentence. A record from 1423 notes that during Lent the bench was draped in sackcloth to dampen idle comfort, though the friar is still perched there to discuss cabbage futures. Micro hook, a sedate goose claimed the leftmost spot for 3 entire seasons, inspiring the proverb as settled as Brother Goose. In spring, a carpenter adds a second rail beneath, discovering by accident the basic torsion equation of sag over time and equation, destined to recur in municipal budget reports for centuries. By the late 1700s, the bench graduates to promenades where polite society performs the slow loop of being seen not moving too fast. London's St. James's Park commissions 30 elm slats painted the color of overcast tea. They are spaced precisely 1 chain apart, the better to maintain conversational drift without eavesdropping collisions. An elderly viscount complains. The paint traps heat and scorches his pamphlet. Within a week, all benches are repainted a paler shade called Don Fog No. 4. A groundskeeper times how long strangers remain seated before consulting their pocket watch's average. 7 minutes 26 seconds shorter on Thursdays, inexplicably longer during cricket finals. The findings, scrawled on a damp ledger, later informed the recommended interval for park keepers to jingle keys as a gentle dispersal cue. Across the Atlantic, 1853 sees New York Central Park Planning Board debate bench backrests. Frederick Law Olmsted champions the straight splat, arguing that slouching breeds moral torpor. Calvert Vaux countersketches a cedar curve shaped after a shepherd's crook. He claims it echoes pastel virtue. They settle on a compromise, straight upper rail. Modest lumbar arch and arrangement future yogis will applaud for mid-spine neutrality. Installation crews discover squirrels prefer the curved underside, leading to acorn caches so symmetrical that visitors assume deliberate design. Micro hook, one bench accidentally riveted at a 5-degree tilt, becomes the city's most popular spot for rereading sentimental chapters, apparently because every sigh feels already halfway to horizontal. The industrial era invites cast iron. Flourishes. Persian foundries pour arabesque ends that weigh as much as small pianos. Delivery men complain benches now require 2 lunches to move. Yet the new strength permits thinner wooden slats, which clap like subdued applause when weather shrinks the screws. An 1891 etiquette guide warns ladies to test for lingering wet paint using a discreet handkerchief swirl, lest backside rouge become the day's unwitting commentary. Meanwhile, tram stops adopt benches with high central dividers to prevent reclining. A prankster in Prague counts sleepers anyway and finds the divider merely shifts streams to steeper angles. His report, titled On the Resilience of Napping, circulates for a week before being tucked appropriately beneath a seat cushion dot when electricity stitches its early spider web across boulevards. Designers flirt with heated benches. A prototype in Stockholm channels surplus power from tram cables, but snow melts unevenly, carving melancholy stripes across each plank. Patrons complain the effect resembles sitting on unfolding thermometers. The project is quietly shelved. The benches continue to hoard their cold dignity. In Tokyo, 1927, engineers install lantern posts directly behind selected seats so evening readers may finish one more chapter. Librarians notice an uptick in returns of the final volume only, suggesting borrowers left earlier ones at home. When lamplight tempted them further into endings, wartime austerity pairs, benches back to raw boards laid over salvaged rail ties. Some are painted camouflage green so thoroughly that occupying pigeons vanish against them like feathery parentheses. Children scratch arithmetic tables into the soft pitch pine, turning waiting into revision. A London diarist record sharing. A bench with an unexploded propaganda leaflet. Both sit quietly until the all-clear siren trades monotony for relief. After the war, surplus aircraft aluminum births sleek, riveted seats that claim never to rot. They clatter in cold months and amplify every dropped coin. A tinny gong reminding passers-by of metal's impatient echo. Micro hook in 1963 Copenhagen. Tests conversation benches angled at 60 degrees, so occupants face slightly toward each other, without the full commitment of eye contact. Sociologists predict improved civic warmth. Park pigeons simply adjust their flight paths. Surveys show a modest rise in barred matches and polite nods, though one respondent notes the bench listens too much. The design morphs into bus shelter, seating worldwide, its diagonal diplomacy ferrying millions between office and supper. Plastic arrives with the cheer of a permanent picnic. Rotomolded benches resist graffiti, but their bright colors fade along ultraviolet gradients, creating accidental sunsets trapped in polymer. Maintenance crews experiment with pressure washers. Vibrations loosen mounting bolts, and the benches hum like tuning forks for several fascinated seconds. A teenager discovers plucking the edge with a skateboard key produces a D sharp. He organizes a twilight concert. 12 benches perform a chorale until a park ranger, half amused, confiscates the impromptu baton dot in recent decades sustainability. Thatcham's revived timber, now kill-dried FSC certified, and insulated from concrete footings with recycled rubber pucks that look like licorice buttons. Designers drill tiny drainage channels, finally solving the age-old puddle in the middle slat, yet nostalgia persists. One town in Wales varnishes plaques onto seats commemorating beloved dogs, thereby encouraging walkers to sit where paws once paused. Another city seeds VelvetHist antennas beneath armrests. Data graphs reveal people linger 30% longer when silently scrolling, though the number of exchanged smiles dips in parallel. A librarian, charting bench occupancy for a lecture, on furniture as timekeeping, observes that earliest arrivals cluster at ends, leaving the nervous middle vacancy that marks all civilized hesitation tonight. Wherever you are, some bench is absorbing the weight of one last commuter, the hem of wooden fibers settling into grain. It does not hurry. It has counted sunsets through smog, willow pollen, and low-flying butterflies mistaken for confetti. If your eyelids feel as heavy as those iron armrests, you may recline mentally, at least against the faint memory of sackcloth or the hush of camouflage pine. Rest assured the bench will keep watch, collecting unfinished sentences, cooling beneath unremarkable stars, ready to cradle tomorrow's first unhurried sigh. You might not expect rows of pinpricks around a small rectangle of colored paper to have redirected entire afternoons of government debate. Yet every postage stamp perforation is an invisible timeline of how humans decided edges should surrender. If you are still awake by the moment we reach the Austrian duel over whether perforation gauges should be measured in holes per 2 centimeters or precisely in a Paris inch, feel free to subscribe or nod off. The stamps will keep quietly counting. Teeth no matter who is watching. Long before circles of metal fangs gnawed tidy borders, early stamps were issued in uninterrupted sheets that clerks trimmed with scissors dull from opening envelopes. Reports from London's General Post Office in 1841 complain that manual separation breeds ragged margins and verbal recriminations. One junior clerk, precise to a fault, took 12 minutes per letter, pausing after every snip to align designs like a barber matching sideburns. Queue times double, patience halved. A soft punchline emerges here. Customers began bringing personal scissors, fashioning the first postal do-it-yourself kit, though most blades were better suited to bacon rind than Queen Victoria's cameo. Enter Henry Archer, whose sleepless nights produced the Archer Roulette, a device resembling a piano whose keys were stiff steel blades. It sliced short dashed lines between stamps so users could tear along suggestion lines rather than outright instructions. Trials in 1850 revealed that paper fibers preferred to diverge at their own tempo, causing heroic zigzags that made collectors later nickname the issue Drunken Pennies. Still, the idea took root. Separation couldn't rely forever on the moral resolve of scissors. A micro hook for the vigilant listener. Test sheets showed jurors sometimes played tic-tac-toe in the margins, proving even bureaucrats find ways to game boredom. While Archer tinkered, Irish inventor George Nesbitt pursued hole punching instead of slitting. His early machine drove 50 needles through paper with the subtlety of a sewing circle fueled by espresso. Witnesses recalled the rhythmic thunk sounding like distant drum practice, oddly soothing to those filing invoices nearby. The perforation, pattern wet, Philatus later called Imperf 12, looked neat enough until humidity swelled the paper and holes closed shyly like eyelids. Postmasters in damp counties complained stamps required recoring with hat pins. Such setbacks, however, established an enduring metric. How many holes counted per 2 centimeters became shorthand for national temperament, coarse 10s for the hurried, delicate 14s for the patient dot by 1854. The British government adopted. Archer's refined perforator, now a cast iron column crowned with a hand crank. Postal apprentices competed to see who could perforate fastest without jams. The record, noted in a dusty ledger, stands at 3,216 stamps in 1 hour and is strained. Wrist later diagnosed as philatelic tendon. An unintended benefit emerged. Perforated edges trapped less ink smudge, meaning fewer blurred monarchs. Collectors decades on would decide lightly speckled perforations were kissed by history, raising auction prices for what had been mere sloppy inking. Across the Atlantic, the United States tested the Patent Office's own contraption, a foot treadle perforator that squealed like a bicycle lacking oil. Operators developed telltale calf muscles. Parlor gossip held that one could spot a government perforator by his unseasonable stamina climbing church steps. The first American perforated issue of 1857 bore hole counts inconsistent from top. To bottom-proof the treadles sometimes slipped when the operator's mind wandered toward lunch. Today, catalogs politely list these as variations, a reminder that sandwiches influence philately more than armies do. Scene shift as Germany's. Rail printing works pursue perfection with the line perforator, punching one row at a time, then advancing the sheet. Precision soared, but alignment errors made adjacent rows flirt at corners without touching. Philatelists later christened these kissing corners, imagining tiny meetings of design that never quite embrace. In 1868, workers protested the machines. Screech, stuffing cotton in their ears until management installed felt dampers. Silence, it turns out, made every misaligned row heartbreakingly audible. Efficiency rose nonetheless, and Germany's Gauge 14 became an international boast akin to brewing purity laws. Meanwhile, Austria experimented with multi-cone perforators that punched 3 sides at once, leaving the remaining edge until a second pass. The comb's teeth required frequent sharpening. Blunt prongs merely creased, prompting clerks to finish tiers by hand, a regression nobody mentioned aloud. Micro Hook, a Viennese clerk, allegedly tuned his violin to the perforator's hum, composing a waltz that exists today only as a scribble on receipt paper reading ta-ta-ta-ter, rest, ta-ta-ter. Music historians shrug. Stamp historians hum along anyway. The 1890s brought scientific zeal. Swiss engineer Eduard Nadig designed Gage's slender rulers printed with serrated arcs, so collectors could measure hole density, like tailors measuring inseams. Casual hobbyists so suddenly spoke of 12.5 perf, with the confidence of meteorologists predicting drizzle. Clubs held evening meetings where members pressed stamps to gauges, debating whether moisture had tightened paper, altering counts by half a tooth. Spouses waiting at home dubbed these gatherings the silent auctions of minutia, though tea biscuits flowed freely. During World War I, material shortages forced substitutions. Germany's perforator needles, once steel, became softer iron that snapped on harder rag papers. Emergency repairs used piano wire, resulting in slightly oval holes described tactfully as elliptical. Collectors today call them war perfs, a grim nod to how conflict reshapes even the quietest corners of life. In Britain, surplus shelf-used machinery converted to stamp duty. Gauges widened to save on needle replacements, making stamps tear with a leisurely rip of warm toast. One bit of softness among rations and blackouts stopped mid-century automation. Introduced rotary drums bristling with pins like mechanical hedgehogs. Sheets curved around cylinders, and the resulting holes acquired a gentle burr, as though paper wished to keep a souvenir of being punctured. Sorting offices reported fewer jams because curd sheets slid apart with compliant size. Yet nostalgia persisted. Collectors missed the crisp snap of older line perfs. One trade journal printed the lament. Modern stamps part company like polite guests. The old ones divorced with drama. A humorously pointless metaphor, yet apt enough to enter philatelic folklore. Plastic coatings briefly promised self-adhesive stamps without need for perforation at all. The first trials in 1964 Australia featured peel and stick kangaroos, bounding free of borders. Traditionalists muttered that tearing was half the pleasure, like popping bubble wrap before bubble wrap existed. Postal surveys found users liked the convenience but missed the audible rip, that tiny outbreath of commitment. Designers compromised by laser-cutting wavy silhouettes that mimic perforations visually, an affectionate forgery of the old handshake between finger and stamp. Today, optical perforation detectors shine LEDs through holes to verify authenticity, because counterfeiters sometimes print white dots instead of punching real voids. The machine's verdict arrives as a green tick or a red frown, suggesting stamps now undergo airport security. Yet, amid lasers and polymers, the act of tearing along perforation still occupies precisely one heartbeat, providing a pause long. Enough for memory to wander, a grandmother saving pretty corners in a biscuit tin, a desk blotter speckled with gum, the faint metallic scent of old office scissors, if your eyelids are weighing down like a multi-comb jaw after a long print. Run. Picture the universal gauge chert rows of tiny teeth marching nowhere, wholly content. They have measured patience since Archer's restless nights. They have survived wars, mechanization, even the silicon grin of email. Tomorrow's mail may travel by drone, yet some clerk will still steady a thumb on an edge, feel the hesitant. Give, and listen for that modest rip confirming departure. And somewhere, perhaps right now, a final letter drifts into a blue box, its stamp bedecked with 40 punctures of historical yawn, ready to journey at the speed of collective exhale. Sleep, like postage, requires only the right perforation before separation from the day.